Good afternoon and welcome to PVA's ADA 30 Celebration webinar. We will be getting started momentarily. Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to Paralyzed Veterans of America's ADA 30 Celebration webinar, Celebrating Access, Highlighting Remaining Barriers. We want to welcome you to today's event. We have a great list of speakers and panelists that we think you'll really enjoy hearing from. Before we get started, we want to have just a brief discussion about webinar process. So if you have any questions that come up during the presentation, please do put those in the Q&A control box that you will see on your screen. We're going to get to our questions and answers at the end of today's presentation. Also, if you need to access the live captioning during the webinar, please use this URL that we have on the screen. This information was also included in your registration confirmation email, as well as the reminder emails that you received about an hour ago. So if you want to go directly to that link, you can be able to do so. And just a reminder that we are recording today's webinar and it will be available on pva.org on our new ADA webpage as soon as it is available for posting. So it's now my honor to introduce PVA National President David Zurfluh, who's going to give us a few opening remarks for today. David?
Thank you, Heather. Hopefully you can all hear me. As Heather said, we'll have some staff will be presenting some PowerPoints, and we'll have some individuals, members of PVA, talk about their experience with the ADA and what it means to them. They'll deliver some personal stories. Before we start, I want to read something really important. I think that just stands out to me. The ADA stands as the most comprehensive civil rights law affecting people with disabilities ever enacted in the United States. I think right there, that's a very powerful statement. And I think it even goes beyond that. I think it is permeated throughout the globe. And I think it's in the minds of world leaders, corporate leaders. And I think they look at the United States as the leader and the driver of defining the ADA, not only in the United States, but worldwide and beyond. So this is an important celebration, it's an important anniversary. The ADA has affected everybody's life here. It's affected my life personally. They'll hear these stories. So let's be proud of this work, and especially I want to thank the individuals early on, back in the 80s and up until 1990 when it was passed, who made this day possible. So with that said, I would like to turn it back over to Heather and get the program started. Again, thank you for attending. I hope you enjoyed today's webinar. Heather?
Thank you, David. I appreciate that welcoming. Now we'll begin with our program. I'd like to introduce Susan Prokop, PVA's National Advocacy Director, and Lee Page, our Senior Associate Advocacy Director. And they're going to spend a little time this afternoon talking with us about how PVA was directly involved in the fight for the Americans with Disabilities Act. So I'll turn it over to you, Susan.
Good afternoon from Washington, D.C. Greetings, everyone. From PVA's founding, we'll pull up our mission statement in the next slide. As you can see, PVA has not only included advocacy for quality health care and benefits for our members, along with support for research and education about spinal cord injury and dysfunction, But PVA has also focused on civil rights and opportunities that maximize the independence for our members and other people with disabilities. Next slide. PVA's history of disability advocacy goes well back before the ADA. Our support for the Architectural Barriers Act and the 1973 Rehabilitation Act served as the basis for PVA's fight to ensure the accessibility of the Washington, D.C. subway system when it was under development. PVA used the Rehabilitation Act in its unsuccessful lawsuit in the 1980s to make air travel accessible. However, that effort ultimately led to the passage of the 1986 Air Carrier Access Act. More about our ongoing battles there later. But unfortunately, these laws only address disability rights in certain circumstances. On the next slide is just a brief synopsis of the Americans with Disabilities Act. That's why the ADA was needed. The ADA and its 5 titles covering employment, state and local government services and programs, public accommodations, telecommunications, and the internet seeks to prohibit discrimination in the broadest waterfront of public life, from jobs to transportation to public and private places open to the general public. Its aim is to ensure that people with disabilities have the same rights and opportunities as everyone else. Next slide. So PVA joined the fight for the ADA from its very beginnings. As another PVA member, Fred Cowell, said at the time, Paralyzed Veterans of America was smart enough to realize that while the ADA was not a veterans issue per se, it had the broadest possible impact for our members. In 1989, PVA joined over 80 allies in the Consortium for Citizens with Disabilities in endorsing the ADA. CCD is the largest coalition of national organizations working together to advocate for federal public policy that ensures the self-determination, independence, empowerment, integration, and inclusion of children and adults with disabilities in all aspects of society. Next slide. PVA's advocacy for the ADA continued into 1989 using some of the most modern communications techniques at the time that were available. As you see here, we sent out a Western Union mailgram to our executive committee and chapters, urging them to call their senators to hold firm against weakening amendments when that bill came up for a vote in the Senate. We sent a memo to our chapter presidents with a pre-printed Support ADA postcard asking them to ring in the new decade, 1990, by sending postcards to their members of Congress and to the House leadership and to key committee members. Over the course of several months, PVA National, its chapters, its leadership, and its members would send hundreds of letters in support of the ADA. Members would attend many of the local forums organized by Justin Dart, who was traveling around the country to collect testimonies from people with disabilities about discrimination that they had experienced in their hometowns. And PVA members traveled to Capitol Hill to lend their voices to the movement for the ADA. Next slide. So appearing before the Senate Labor and Human Resources Committee, National Vice President Perry Tillman described going to Vietnam as an idealistic young man to fight for American ideals, which he thought were there for everyone, until he acquired a disability. Explaining PVA's support for the ADA, Tillman said, "We do so because we know firsthand what it's like to be denied access to theaters, restaurants, buses, and places of business and employment simply because a doorway is too narrow or an entrance has steps. I have fought since my injury to regain my rightful place in society, and I ask you, the members of Congress, to join me and give quick and favorable consideration to the Americans with Disabilities Act. Next slide. Peter Odesso was one of PVA's hospital liaisons, and he testified to the House Judiciary Committee about his experiences trying to access a local swimming pool and being turned away. Trying to dine out at a local restaurant, he was asked to leave because he presented a fire hazard. He concluded his testimony to the committee saying, "I received a Purple Heart, a Combat Action Award, and Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry. Although I am proud of these honors, they are no substitute for the freedoms that I lost to achieve them. On behalf of all veterans who fought so hard and sacrificed so much for this great nation, I urge you and your colleagues to act quickly and enact the Americans with Disabilities Act." So as 1990 dawned, the battle for the ADA moved from the Senate into the House of Representatives. And my colleague, Lee Page, was newly hired into PVA's advocacy program and was thrown immediately into the intensifying efforts to gain passage of the law. And I will turn it over now to Lee for some reflections on that final push. Lee.
Okay, great, Susan. Thank you very much. I hope everybody can hear me. Exactly as Susan said, it's amazing to me that today is 30 years of the ADA, 1990. I had just been hired at PVA, as Susan, Doug had hired me in December of 1989, and Maureen McCloskey and Fred Cowell also. And so the advocacy department had had a complete makeover. And as Susan said, I started on January 15th, and on the 16th, I was up on the Hill advocating for passage of the ADA. It had already passed the Senate in September of '89 by a vote of 76-8. So obviously it had overwhelming support from Republicans and Dems. And then basically, it's funny because it was a very unique time politically. If you think back, we had George H.W. Bush, who was Republican president, and then we had both houses of Congress were controlled by the Democrats. In fact, the Democrats had been in control of Congress for 30 some odd years. And so it was very, basically, Congress would work together on a whole host of issues. And we got ADA, which is a very comprehensive, broad civil rights bill, passed. The final passage was in the House on July 12th, and it was 377-28 from the House side, and then 91-6 from the Senate side. So as you can see by those votes, it was an overwhelming bipartisan passage. And if you look at the picture, you can see that's the crowd of advocacy lobbyists who were lobbying Capitol Hill from the CCD, which is the Consortium on Citizens with Disabilities, which was basically the inside the Beltway disability organizations that were united together to advocate passage of ADA. And I am pictured all the way to the far right, right on the last person on the sidewalk. So it was a real interesting time. And I was brand new to PVA, and it was kind of like getting on, coming in on top of the mountain with the greatest achievement that we had done over the years. Next slide. And yeah, next slide. There you go. And so basically on July 26, George Bush signed the bill into law, And you can see by the crowd, there were 3,000 people on the back side of the south lawn of the White House. It was the largest bill signing ceremony that had ever been, and probably ever has been. I don't think we've seen anything larger. It was extremely hot that day. It was July, as you can see, and they were debating whether or not to actually hold the ceremony outside or not, because they thought it would be too strenuous for all the people with disabilities. And we were almost offended by that. And so we fought back and said, that's outrageous. We want to be outside. And so there again, it was a huge signing ceremony at like 10 o'clock in the morning, and people were still on the backside of the White House till about 2 o'clock, just congratulating everyone. And then you see that cake that had the president's face on it. I'm not sure where that was, but anyway, it was a great day. And then it was on, back to the office and more fights for advocacy on different issues going forward. Next slide. I think that's back to you, Heather.
Thanks, Lee. So now we want to take a moment and talk to some of our PVA members to get their reflections on the Americans with Disabilities Act, and both from the time of its passage to now. So I'd like to introduce each one of our PVA member panelists and have the opportunity to introduce them to all of you. So first I'll start with Charles Brown. He is our National Senior Vice President for Paralyzed Veterans of America, a Marine Corps veteran who sustained a spinal cord injury as a result of a diving accident while serving in Cherry Point, North Carolina. From the beginning of his injury, Charlie has been involved at really all levels of PVA, including one of his early stops serving as chapter ADA coordinator. In addition to his extensive work, Charlie is also on the USA bocce team and was selected team captain for the Parapan American Games in Guadalajara, Mexico. Next, Twyla Adams is from Charlotte, North Carolina. Twyla is an Army veteran who served for 11 years. She departed the Army for health reasons after serving in Desert Shield, Desert Storm. She is also an avid athlete and member of the PVA Southeastern chapter. And her motto is, no matter what the challenges are in your life, never give up, because if you are alive, there is always hope. That's a great motto, Twyla. Lastly, we have Jose Reynoso. Jose is also a Marine Corps veteran who enlisted at the age of 17, a month after graduating from high school. He served as an infantryman and did 2 deployments during his 4 years, separating from the Marine Corps in September of 2012. 3 years later, Jose was injured in a catastrophic motorcycle accident resulting in paraplegia. Once he became aware of PVA, he decided to learn more about the organization because he wanted to help others in need, who had been in need like him. And he is currently serving on PVA's board of directors as our national director from our California chapter. So thank you, Charlie, Twyla, and Jose, for taking the time to be with us today. So we wanted to start with a first question, and Charlie, I'm going to start with you because I know that you were injured prior to the Americans with Disabilities Act passing, so you've got some experience on both sides of this law. So I wanted to get your thoughts on, what is the thing that you are the most thankful for that the ADA has brought to you and to other people with disabilities?
Standardized access to living in the community. Before the ADA, a lot of times you had to actually roll down the street, find a driveway or curb cut, or a driveway to get up onto the curb, because there was no curb cuts in a lot of places. You get to the building and you couldn't go to the front door, there was no access. You had to go around the back. In order to get up inside the building, you had to actually use a service elevator. And so basically we were told we're second-class citizens. Find access in any way you can, and service elevators was basically it.
Wow, that definitely must have been really tough to deal with, and something that definitely having the ADA come along would make you thankful for.
Very much so. Having front door
Twyla,
access.
I know you. No, go ahead, Charlie.
It's just saying having front door access being treated normal. That's what it really means.
I like that. Front door access, what we all deserve, right? Twyla, I know that you had the opportunity to talk with some of your fellow PVA members and to get some of their reflections on the ADA. So I'm wondering if you could share with us some of those reflections and also some of your own.
Thank you, Heather. Angela acquired her disability after ADA was established, and she said she's thankful for the agencies that train workers to better understand those of us who are uniquely able. Alan Washington, he acquired his disability before ADA, and he's very thankful for the hotel accessibilities. And when I think about what it means to me, it's knowing that I can call a transportation companies and make arrangements with a dedicated accessibility department. As an adaptive wheelchair athlete, I travel across the US competing. So having accessibility department is a huge plus.
That's great, Twyla. Being able to travel, I know, is something most of us miss right now. So being able to do it when we can is definitely an important part of being in your community. Jose, I know that if I do my math correctly, you were injured about 25 years after the passage of the ADA. So what are you especially grateful for, you know, that this law has brought to you as a person with a disability?
Thank you, Heather. Yes, I might possibly be the youngest member, but I am extremely thankful for the accessibility for having the freedom to travel, the freedom to have your own accessible vehicle, being able to travel to, as Twyla had mentioned, she's an athlete. I kind of consider myself an athlete as well, so I like to travel and do all sorts of sports. So having the accessibility to be able to travel on your own, not having to struggle to getting in and out of the vehicle, or having the accessibility for it, it definitely makes a big difference to being able to do what you want to do.
That's great. Well, I heard from all three of you about the importance of being able to travel and to go places and do things and really just do the things we all want to do, be a part of our communities. And I would say be an athlete, but I think of the four of us here, I am not the athlete. So I'm glad that you guys are out there to represent the rest of us. So we talked about some of the things that we are thankful for with ADA. So now let's talk about some of the barriers that we know are still faced every day, even 30 years after the ADA. And Jose, this time I'm going to start with you and say, you know, what would you like to see? What are some of the barriers that you're still facing even now, even after 3 decades have passed?
Yes, of course. Since at least for the ones that I still face, here personally where I live in San Fernando Valley in California, it's filled with vegetation. So we have trees everywhere. I'm surprised we don't have a tree in the middle of a street, but no, the tree roots. So they're always breaking in through the sidewalks. So the concrete slabs are uneven. So usually trying to getting over them, it's like if you're trying to complete a slalom and you're trying to go up a lifted concrete slab and trying to go full speed and then going over, a couple inches. So sometimes you just can't go over it. You have to get kind of like what Charlie mentioned earlier. You have to go down a parking way and onto the street, which is pretty dangerous. And then you have to either find a different route or cross the street. And sometimes it could be time consuming, or sometimes you just don't have the mode to travel to your destination.
Yeah, that would definitely be challenging to know that just to get somewhere you have to go out into the street with cars and really not be safe just because the sidewalk isn't accessible. So definitely that would be challenging. Twyla, what are some of the barriers that you and your fellow PVA members see on your side of the country?
I'd like to see us work harder to enforce accessible parking. I think better enforcement can help people better understand the problems that we face when they ignore the rules. It is unthinkable that some government buildings are still not 100% accessible. That concerns me.
Mhm. Yeah, the thing's still undone. As I like the famous saying, "Oh, I'm grandfathered under the ADA. You know, I don't have to do this." No, that's not true. Yeah, definitely, I agree 100% with all those comments, Twyla. Charlie, tell us what some of the things are that you're still seeing after all these years.
I think the big push here we need to remember is that with the ADA, we've always looked to be nothing special, nothing more than what the standard person goes through. The same barriers they would have is what we want. We don't want anything extra. We want to have accessibility, and we really need to make sure that the public restrooms, the shopping, the normal daily life things that we look forward to are accessible to us. And like Twyla said, we need to make sure that there's going to be somebody out there to help enforce it, making sure that they're following the rules the way they're supposed to. By doing that, I think it allows us actually to live a better life, jobs, you know, living in community in the normal life. That's exactly what this is about. You know, keeping the enforcement so we can continue living normal lives.
Enforcement definitely is a key to making sure that this law continues to work, something we know is lacking in some places. And I imagine if we had everybody's ability to speak, we probably would have gotten a chorus of amens and agreement as you guys were mentioning some of the things that you are still encountering. So now one final question. So if you were in charge for the day and had the chance to make any accessibility improvement that would make such a difference in your life or that of your fellow veterans, what would that thing be? And Twyla, this time I'm going to start with you.
Okay. There's so many things I can think of, but the first that comes to mind is I would fix all of the streets so that people that use wheelchairs and other adaptive equipment for mobility can always get around freely. I'd wave my magic wand and I'd change or adapt the thinking of all ABs, which we call able-bodied people, who do not understand that we are just like them, except we're uniquely able. I would just boop and make it better.
That's great, Twyla. Jose, what would you do?
Yes, pretty much kind of what like Twyla mentioned, making everything accessible for everyone, such as, you know, simple things as, you know, going to hotel rooms or going to your own, you know, house or apartment complex, or just, you know, entering restaurants or just, you know, anywhere you go visit. Sometimes you just can't enter them because they don't either they haven't made a ramp for it, or it just, you know, something's broken and you can't go in, elevator doesn't work. So sometimes you have to get carried up to the entrance, or sometimes you just can't. There's no mode of you getting into the building, so you have to go find a different location. So that would possibly be one of the things I would want to fix, as Twyla had mentioned. There's so many things, but that's probably one of the things that I would definitely like to fix if I also had a magic wand to, you know, to fix anything I could.
All right, well, we're passing the magic wand to you, Charlie. What would be the thing that you would address?
We often face it a lot when we travel, we do things. The biggest thing I think would be having more accessible wheelchair or just accessible rooms at hotels. It's a big aspect when you go someplace. They've got 2 or 3, you book it online, you do what you can, and you call them up, you say they're available, you get there and they've given it away. Somebody else has got there before you. And if they have more rooms accessible, there's no need to even ask for one because they're all accessible. A big push that I think we've done a great job with and we can do better with is also in sports complexes. Nowadays, you go to a sporting complex, you don't have to look at somebody's back. You actually see the game, you see the scoreboard, you see the events. So again, making that view normal, you know, getting things equalized across the board is what really counts.
Well, that's great. We want to thank you, Jose and Twyla and Charlie, for taking a few minutes to talk with us here and to share your thoughts and reflections. And certainly these are things that help inform PVA's advocacy and that of our chapters, throughout the years. So thank you for your time today. So now we're going to go back to our presentation, and we're going to have Lee Page kick us off to start talking about some of the issues that PVA is continuing to advocate on, some of which were things that you heard about from our members today. So Lee?
Okay, great. Thanks, Heather. Yes, there's a whole bunch of issues that the department works on, and just sitting here listening to the three members, Charlie, Twyla, and Jose, a common theme was, let's talk about hotels. Well, hotels and motels, that's the largest public accommodation throughout the country. As a public accommodation, they have to comply with the ADA section Title III. What Title III is, it covers public accommodations. They've got to be covered by the ADAG, which is the ADA Accessible Guidelines. Those are guidelines that were published by the Access Board and adopted by the Department of Justice. And they have a wide spectrum of dimensions and design guidelines that a public accommodation would have to comply with. And it takes into effect a wide variety of disability, including blind or low vision, deaf, hard of hearing, people who use wheelchairs, crutches and canes, and walkers. And so supposedly the hotel industry is supposed to use these guidelines when it comes to designing their rooms, the wheelchair accessible rooms, and the other aspects of the hotel. So, but the real deal is we still find barriers at hotels 30 years after the fact. One of the big issues, as we all know, are bed heights. Currently, right now, the beds are too tall. And so it makes it pretty tough to make an independent transfer from a wheelchair into the bed, even if a person is using a sliding board or what have you. Also, if the bed is on a box frame, there's no room to put a Hoyer lift underneath the bed that would also assist in a transfer. So, and then we look at the fact that the bathrooms are starting to, they're not really meeting the design guidelines of what a roll-in shower looks like. In some cases, they're getting away from bathtubs and installing one-step showers, which makes it impossible for a wheelchair person, A, to either roll into, or B, to transfer from the chair into the shower because it's a step up, basically. Other aspects of barriers in a hotel are the reach range. You can be in a wheelchair accessible room, and unfortunately, the reach range to do the heat and air conditioning controls are too high, or too tall, or there's some sort of barrier in the way for that reach range. Same with the coat hangers in the closet and all of that. It's just the reach range is too far. So some of the other things that we've got to take that hotels need to really take in mind is the fact that door pulls, doorknobs aren't accessible, door weight is heavy, the carpet could be too thick, and then you've got the parking lot and the design of handicap parking, and then curb cuts and entrances. One of the things that drives me crazy is, the main entrance to get into the hotel is accessible and has a curb cut and you can get in, but say the back door entrance where you have to park because you're on the backside of the hotel, doesn't have a curb cut to get up on the sidewalk to come in the back door. So you end up having to push around the entire facility to get back to the front. So anyway, so what we've been doing is we've been working with the industry to come up with some solutions. We've met with Marriott Industries and also the lobby associations for the hotel industry. Heather and myself and also meeting staff have been involved, and we're looking forward, you know, when we get back to business as normal, to interacting with the industry on a more regular basis to come up with some solutions. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. One of the other big issues that we've been working on is transportation. When President Bush signed the ADA, he said transportation is the linchpin of the ADA. Without accessible transportation, you can't get to a job, you can't go shopping, you can't do your doctor's appointments, all of the above. Over the years, we've been working with Amtrak to get them to come into compliance. When the law was passed in 1990, Amtrak was given a grace period of 20 years to come into compliance, not until 2010. And in 1988, PVA did an instructional video for Amtrak called How May I Assist You, where we, basically it was a customer service video where trying to train Amtrak personnel in how to assist people with disabilities on and off the train. It was really a great instructional video. Unfortunately, Amtrak saw that basically as their full compliance of ADA. So what came about was in 2011, the National Disability Rights Network put out an Inspector General's compliance report and found that Amtrak had completely failed in their duties to comply with the ADA. And as a result, there was a class action lawsuit in 2013 across the sector for Amtrak. As a result, today, we meet with Amtrak on a quarterly basis. Basically, they have an advisory panel of people with disabilities, and we meet on a quarterly basis. And they are, you know, they're trying to come into compliance. They've got raised platforms and carbon fiber reporting plates, which makes it a lot easier to get on and off the train, and an accessible restroom and an accessible sleeper car and adjacent to the dining car. So Amtrak's coming is doing a lot better now, but still got a lot more work to do. The impact of the pandemic basically on other aspects of transportation. You look at the over-the-road bus, such as Greyhound, and you look at the city bus or a fixed route system. Right now, all these drivers are required to have a PPE, masks and gloves and everything to protect them, because they are, you know, basically an exposed personnel during this COVID-19 crisis time. And truthfully, all loading of buses is deemed to come in through the rear access door. Well, unfortunately, on most of these buses, the only access for a person in a wheelchair is through the front door. If you look at the picture on this slide, you see Perry Tillman back in the early days getting off of a fixed route bus via that little ramp right there. All buses, all city buses, fixed route buses, basically have lifts on them now. And so the lift would be deployed, a person would roll on and go to the designated seat and strap in. And so, but anyway, with the pandemic going on, it's a matter of everyone wearing the proper PPE to ensure that they have a safe and secure ride. Autonomous vehicles is something of the future. It's another issue that we've been working on, because some say that an autonomous vehicle would be an extremely accessible vehicle for people with disabilities, including those with wheelchairs. Unfortunately, the real deal is that the auto manufacturers are working extremely hard on this issue. You know, Ford, Chevy, Volvo, those are the original equipment manufacturers, or manufacturers that we say. But the reality is they're building on existing platforms. So basically they're taking the platform of a current car. And as you know, right now, accessible vehicles are aftermarket modifications, meaning a minivan has to have a lift installed into it in order to get a wheelchair in it. There's not a low floor design that a person in a wheelchair could actually roll into. There are certain autonomous vehicles that are active right now. Basically, it would be in the public sector first. What I'm talking about is, say, in Las Vegas, there's a shuttle bus that goes from A to point B that would be autonomous, that would stop and people would climb on, and then they would shuttle down to the next stop. Unfortunately, these things are not wheelchair accessible. An accessible autonomous vehicle would be, in the ideal world, would have low floor entrance technology. So a person could roll in, then you would self-lock. There'd be a self-locking mechanism, and then voice activated controls where the person could say, close door, adjust air conditioning, adjust the windows, take me to where I want to go. And then the car would be self-aware, meaning that the autonomous vehicle, once you got to that destination, would be able to park or deploy you, out of the traffic lane onto the sidewalk, and then would be able to close back up. There again, this sounds a lot like pie in the sky, but the reality is the manufacturers are working hard on this issue. PVA is, working on this issue with the other disability organizations and the auto manufacturers. And at this point, Congress is not looking at the issue, but they will see what they say next Congress. Next slide. Next slide, please. Heather. Okay. Voting. As you know, this is an election year. We're going to have an election in November. There are a few laws that go into effect that affect voting for people with disabilities. The big one, of course, is the ADA, which passed back in 1990. And the real deal is that the ADA has the polling place checklist, which was published by the Access Board and adopted by DOJ. And so you can go to ada.gov and look at the polling place checklist, and that will show you the designs of what a polling place is supposed to look like. And you can take that design and when you do your inspection of polling places, to ensure that they're accessible, and then also refer that to polling officials if you see barriers at your poll, and then they can utilize that checklist to ensure that the polling place is more accessible. National Voter Registration Act passed in 1993 and requires the DMV, Division of Motor Vehicles, to provide voter registration. It also the law also requires social service offices to do voter registration also. And then you've got the Help America Vote Act, HAVA, which passed back in 2002. And that law requires that the ballot be secure and independent ballot. So a person is able to vote securely and independent. Okay, the impact of the pandemic on voting, as you know, you saw a lot of primaries have been postponed or moved. You saw what happened in Wisconsin, where you have people standing in line. Voting went on till midnight at night. Same down in Georgia. You had people standing in these long lines, not really having access to the polls. Everyone is socially distancing themselves, wearing PPE. And so the question is, what is going to happen when we get to November? Well, some of the recommendations are that early voting needs to occur. Early voting, state and local jurisdictions are allowed to do early voting. Normally they do it 2 weeks in advance. And that means you can go to a voting center in your county or your local jurisdiction that's been designated any day 2 weeks in advance, and you can cast your ballot in person there. The other aspect would be expand vote by mail. You've heard a lot about that lately, probably in the news. Expand vote by mail. Currently, all 50 states have vote by mail. Mainly, it's the request for an absentee ballot. 35 states have no excuse, no fault excuse vote by mail, meaning all you got to do is send in a request for a ballot, an absentee ballot. They'll send it to you, and then you can mail it back. And you don't have to have a real excuse. You just say, that's what I want to do, is vote by mail. The other states remaining, you have to have an excuse that's determined by the state. It's so funny, there was a hearing just 2 days ago. West Virginia and Tennessee secretaries of state testified, and the difference was night and day. West Virginia is no excuse absentee ballot. They actually do electronic voting for the overseas and military people and people who live overseas. And then they also included people with disabilities in electronic voting. And they said it was extremely successful in their primary. The state of Tennessee, the Secretary of State said that fear of COVID-19 was not a valid reason for an absentee ballot, which was extremely disappointing in that aspect. So, and that's what the Senate said. So, but the real deal is that expand vote by mail is something that another option for the states to do. But the reality is all those ballots that have to be returned, in some cases, you can return that to a drop box. Communities have drop boxes for the elections, or you put it in the post office. But the reality is it has to get back to the poll by 7 o'clock of the night. The post office has not been extremely reliable. So the best part about voting by mail is you can take your time in filling out your ballot at home and then send it in, but just ensure that you, in a timely fashion, so it gets back by the deadline. Also, print disability, that's a term that I had not really heard of before, but what that is people who are blind or low vision or have limited hand dexterity, basically people who have trouble handling paper. And that means that a person who has trouble handling paper cannot actually fill out in an independent and secure manner. So that's one of the things you'll be hearing about as we talk about expanding our vote by mail. It's also ensuring that the polls are available for people with disabilities who want to physically go into the poll to utilize the electronic voting machines, because those machines are where people can actually cast their ballot in an independent, safe, and secure manner. There again, if you're going to the polls, it's PPE, proper protective equipment, which is face for you as a voter. All poll workers will be wearing PPE. They'll have hand sanitizers, and then they will be cleaning all the machines after the fact. It'll make for a long day, but as you know, voting is a constitutional right. Anyone who's 18 years or older who's registered to vote, and for us PVA members and all veterans, it's ensuring the advocacy of our democracy. Next slide. Next, ADA notification. ADA notification, as you may know, a couple years ago, there was the bill HR 620. Basically, what that would require is a notice and cure period before a person with a disability could file a lawsuit for physical barriers. So there again, we're opposed to this issue because anybody who wants to go to a public accommodation, such as a hotel or a store, or what have you, and you find barriers 30 years after the law, when they were supposed to have been in effect in 1992, you can file, currently you can file a lawsuit or file a complaint with the Department of Justice or file a lawsuit and not have to do notification. The notification language of the notification bill was basically taking away our right to file that lawsuit without having to notify the business, give them the cure period, which is like 15 to 2 weeks or a month or however, to fix the problem. And the real deal is it takes away the incentive for businesses to comply with the ADA. It would be a wait and see. So businesses would not do anything until they get contacted by someone saying they wanted to file a lawsuit. So fortunately, ADA notification is not in the Congress right now. It was a couple Congresses ago. It's an issue that we always need to keep in mind because it could always come back. Next slide. I think I flip over to Susan at this time.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So, despite the challenges, or despite the protections offered by the ADA, employment has remained a challenge for people with disabilities, and COVID-19 has exacerbated those problems with almost 1 million people with disabilities losing their jobs in just the first 2 months of the pandemic alone. For people with disabilities returning to or entering the workforce in the COVID-19 era, new challenges are arising around mask policies, telework, and other measures meant to reduce the risk of exposure to the virus. As noted on the slide, employers must consider requests for accommodations to respond to the virus, and the DOL Office of Disability Employment Policy has compiled in one handy location a set of links to various employment resources related to the coronavirus. I want to give a shout out to PVA's PAVE program, our vocational rehabilitation program, which is a valuable resource for any veterans with disabilities and their caregivers seeking employment or help with navigating the work world in the days of COVID. And you can also find a wealth of information about protections for people with disabilities during COVID on PVA's website at pva.org/COVID-19. On the next slide, we're going to wrap things up quickly with that there's a good reason to continue celebrating ADA 30 on PVA's dedicated website, pva.org/ADA. There you'll find a wealth of fact sheets about the law and disability rights issues, archived webinars, and recently posted results from a PVA member survey about ongoing accessibility challenges faced by our members and other people with disabilities. You can also share your own ADA experiences on that site through our story portal. So please do take advantage of that. And now I am turning it back to Heather.
Thank you, Susan, for walking us through those various ongoing challenges. So we have just a short time here today. to go over some questions. We knew we were going to be limited in our time, so we do have our email addresses here, and welcome you to reach out to us at any time with your feedback or comments that we can be helpful on. One of the questions that we did receive, and I know came up as we were talking to our PVA members, was about enforcement. And certainly enforcement of the law and how we can make sure that the provisions that are available are actually followed by businesses and also state and local governments. It is certainly part of those efforts that we have to make sure that the law's goals actually get achieved. So we know that enforcement can be challenging. We have had opportunities to submit complaints recently to the Department of Justice. Unfortunately, we hear from them that, you know, a lot of those complaints they don't take up necessarily. They send them back with resources to try to look at it on a local matter. On a local level, it's also difficult to find attorneys who will take those cases because for Title III challenges, which would be things against restaurants and hotels and local businesses, there are no damages, and damages is really where the money is in a lawsuit. The only thing you can do in an ADA suit is to say fix the problem, and then your attorney can get attorney's fees. But it certainly can be challenging. Some of the ways to try to we are advocating to ensure that the Department of Justice and other enforcement agencies, you know, get additional funding so that we can have more of a focus on the civil rights departments of agencies and make sure that they are able to properly assess complaints and follow up on them. We also encourage you to look at state laws that may exist on ADA, but on the state level or local level, there may be opportunities there. We've also had some success recently, and if I could call on Lee, if he could ready his mic. We had an opportunity recently to file a complaint with the Department of Transportation, the FAA, regarding an inaccessible hotel shuttle, which would have been an ADA Title III violation, which could have gone to Department of Justice. But because this particular hotel shuttle was on the grounds of an airport, we tried a different tactic. And that may be helpful to some of you. So Lee, could you just briefly let folks know about that?
Sure. As you know, this happens all the time. We get to an airport and then can't get to our hotel because there's no airport shuttle accessibility, not from the airport, not from the hotel, or vice versa. And Heather and I were in Phoenix, and, you know, after trying to figure out which way to go, I was fed up, and we filed a complaint with the FAA because if we'd done it with DOJ, they'd have said, thanks for the complaint, take a number, because they've got so many. Anyway, the letter came back, and FAA found that 2 hotels and the airport were in violation of the DOJ by not providing alternative services via the fact that they didn't have, you know, the hotel didn't have a shuttle that was accessible, and yet they still didn't provide me with a way to get to the airport. And so they were in violation, and so now, you know, they've got, the FAA will enforce them to get into compliance and go through a training program, because the real deal is for the airport to license these hotels to provide shuttle buses to and from an airport, they have to comply with all aspects of ADA, and yet they weren't doing it. And so justice is one way of doing it. It takes too long because justice is overwhelmed, or a private attorney, but doing it through FAA was another avenue we discovered, and they were all over it. And I say that, it still took 1.5 years, but it was still a pleasant surprise when I got the letter. Heather.
So thanks, Lee. So sometimes there may be other avenues. If you have questions, we're happy to try to brainstorm with you and see if we can come up with with other ways to try to get enforcement, and know that there is certainly an appetite amongst many people with disabilities and with some on Capitol Hill to really try to look at what can we do to move ADA forward. We've been playing defense for quite a while, trying to keep the provisions and rights that we have, but there is an appetite to look at what we can do to continue to get improvements. I know some of you had questions about accessible parking. We know that that's an area that we're looking at. Bed heights in hotels. There have been efforts through the Department of Justice in the past to look at regulations. So lots of different areas that we see from the comments and understand those are there. Again, we invite you to reach out to us directly with our email addresses with any questions that we weren't able to get to today. But now in our final minute here, I would like to turn this over to Carl Blake, who is going to just give us a couple of concluding remarks. Carl?
Thank you, Heather. So first, I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and I want to thank not only our PVA team specifically, but Twylan, Jose, who joined us from the outside, but from within the organization to participate. I think there's two big takeaways from today. One is it's a great thing that we were able to get such a monumental piece of legislation passed 30 years ago in the ADA, and it really fundamentally changed the environment for people with disabilities. And the second thing is our work continues because the barriers are still there. There are still challenges that we most need to overcome. I share my background with it. I told the staff before we started, this is sort of a good microcosm of the challenges that we're still dealing with today. Here's a handicapped accessible space in a hospital parking lot that is half blocked by a telephone pole in the parking lot, which leads to what you see in a situation like that. All that's to say, clearly there's more work that needs to be done to ensure that all barriers that are out there for people with disabilities can be knocked down, can be removed, so that the built environment can be a more accessible place, so that the employment environment can be more accessible for people seeking employment, and our work will not stop. I cannot emphasize enough what Heather said. If you have any questions, you have any concerns, or you need our help, please reach out to us. That's why we're there. That's the work that we do, from legal help to working on the legislative side. There's no shortage of issues that we need to continue to focus on in this space, and we rely on the people that are out there and their experiences to inform that work. So please do not hesitate to reach out to us. And again, to learn more about not only what we've done, but what we're also moving forward, please website www.pva.org/ADA. The website again is www.pva.org/ADA. And with that, I'd like to thank our team again. I'd like to thank everybody for participating, and we look forward to chatting with you all soon. So thank you again.
Thank you, Carl. So as a reminder, we did record today's webinar, and it will be available on the PVA website along with the slides in probably sometime next week. So stay tuned, and you'll be able to watch this information again. We appreciate your time today. We know there's a lot of events for ADA 30, particularly today. So thank you again for joining with us, and stay tuned for the next webinar series that we'll be putting together. Have a good day.